Hello, everyone. I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of Treasury Webinars. I'm thrilled to have you joining us for our session today, Drivers of Treasury Success in the Next Normal. This has been a topic near and dear to my heart. So I've been talking about the drivers of Treasury success. Usually what you'll see is a survey on priorities, and then you'll see these are the priorities of Treasury, but it's never really focused on how do we deliver Treasury success. And so I was thinking, let's take a look at metrics. We're in Treasury, right? We should have some amazing metrics. And when I started to dig in, I realized that there really wasn't a lot out there in terms of metrics. And I started to think back to my practitioner days a while ago, and I realized that we really don't have a consensus, right? If we can't define success, how do we get a seat at the strategic table? So I started having conversations with Rachel Collins, my friends at APQC, and I was like, we should think about doing a survey about the metrics, right, where we're at, and then maybe where we need to go. And so how do we really influence the strategic impact of Treasury? We have to be measuring the right things. We have to tie those up to what success means. And so we're going to go ahead and drive you through some content. So we're going to put a structure around metrics, where we're at, where we need to go, but we'll also weave in the survey results from what we've seen. And so Rachel will drive us through the survey and the demographics and the methodology. And I think it'll be a pretty interesting session. So here's our agenda that we'll cover today. So the first thing I want to do is let's cover the theory, right, from my experience, 10 tips to deliver Treasury success. So what are the things that we need to do? And what we'll see, the first step is defining Treasury success. And it's, I don't know, it kind of made me a little sad. We don't know how to do that yet. So I think we need to get there and help people get there. So then we'll talk about the survey, right? We're just focused on delivering success in the next normal, which means in any business environment. And then we'll dive in a little bit to the survey results and put some context around it and look at survey. We'll look at the responsibility. And then we'll look at what I see as a big disconnect. I say Treasury success versus Treasury metrics. And so what we'll show you is that we are actually monitoring things, but we don't see that as a metric, as a determinant of success, which is kind of a disconnect. And then we'll talk about some Treasury success drivers, and then we'll offer some key takeaways. So action-packed session as always. So let's talk about 10 tips for Treasury success. So at the end of the day, the first step is you have to define Treasury success, and we'll talk about how to do that and the metrics, and so that methodology. And this is where it seems like it's really basic, but a lot of companies, if I go to a conference and I ask a treasurer or treasury manager, how do you define Treasury success? You know what I get? A blank look. And so I was in the same boat. I was the same way. So there's definitely a need for us to educate the Treasury leaders on how to measure success and how to deliver it. So in order to get there, we have to understand the skills of our Treasury team. So we have to be able to take that look in the mirror. So we define success, right? What does it take to achieve success? What are the resources that I have to get there? One of them is my team. So what are the skills that my team has? Let's be honest. What are the skills gaps that exist? And then how are we going to fill those, right? Where are we at? Where are we going to be? Where are we going? And how are we going to get there? And then, of course, technology is important as well. So first, we need to take that good look in the mirror. What are our current systems? And a lot of times, even in Treasury, I find that people don't really take a deep enough dive into the whole cash conversion cycle. And so we need to really understand AP and AR, all the disparate systems that are out there. And then we need to see what are the technology gaps and what are the needs. And so what are opportunities if we upgrade our technology? How can we improve our cash conversion cycle? How can we improve our metrics? And one of the big things that everyone will find is that when you do that technology assessment, you'll realize that when you look at the time spent, right, on even blocking and tackling, you'll see that there's a huge productivity drag across the office of the CFO. And so that can be a short-term success factor, right? How we optimize our time. So I don't see metrics on how much time do we spend on the cash forecast? How much time do we spend processing an invoice? How much time do we spend on Cash App, and how do we understand that and manage that? So that there's people, processing, technology, right? The first step is we got to have the right people, we got to give them the right tools, but then we got to give them the right technology and workflow to do that. I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have to understand the time spent on non-value add activities. All the surveys that I've been on, in the conversations that I have, I'm just shocked at how much time people are spending on the phone, chasing paper. A lot of these conversations are due to asymmetries of information, whether that's internally or externally. So in AP, we're on the phone with suppliers, we're having the same conversations, we're having the same arguments with our customers. We're even arguing, sales and AR are arguing because they don't have the right information. So Treasury success means assessing our current relationship with our internal Treasury customers, right? So let's view everyone as our customer and treat them in the same way. And then define what success looks like for them, right? I think before, I was having a conversation this morning with another Treasury thought leader this morning, and we were just talking about how at the high level, we're looking at, the financials, the financial success, right? What we should be looking at is what's driving that success, right? So what are the levers that get us there? So if we do A, B right, so if we have the right incentives with our customers, do we offer value? Are our employees productive? Are they engaged? That's what drives our results. So we're really looking at the end instead of looking at why. So if we look at that in terms of cash forecasting in banks, we used to look at what's the bank information, what happened. We're always worried about what happened. Well, that doesn't really help us. We need to understand why it happened, and why it happened. And cash forecasting gives us predictability, and that's what it can impact our decisions. But as we'll talk about, Treasury people, cash forecasting is not the most important metric of success that you have. So I just kind of giggle with that because I'm like, no, that helps us make better decisions, but it's what's the value of having a better cash forecast, right? So yeah. So anyway, I will digress because I love Treasury. So we need to collaborate more with AP to take more control of payments, right? We should control, right, how and when we're making payments. We should take more control of receipts. And then overarching in any area of the Office of CFO, we need to invest in relationships, as I mentioned earlier, within and beyond Treasury, across the enterprise. We need to invest in our relationships with suppliers, banks, and service providers as well. And so this has been especially important as COVID has unfolded the past 4 or 5 months. We've had challenges in our relationships. So hopefully we've invested in those. And if not, I think it's shown us the importance of those relationships. Relationships are built during times of crisis. And so a lot of times, even at work, it's really a transaction. It's not really a relationship. I need something from you. You need something from me. This is the time you do it. So it's not really a relationship. So many more sessions at the conference about how to do that. So let's go ahead and dive into the study overview. Rachel, can you please take us through it here?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for allowing me to present to you today. So just a little bit about the research project that we did with Ernie, and maybe a minute about myself. Again, Rachel Collins, I'm with APQC, and we're a business research organization, and I'm responsible for the financial management research that we do there. So a few months ago, as Ernie mentioned, we engaged in this research project that involved both an online survey as well as interviews with practitioners across industries. And at APQC, we have a lot of process benchmarks. We have a lot of process KPIs around process cost and such for Treasury, but we didn't have a whole lot when it comes to the best practices and the drivers. And so obviously with the current situation going on, we were hearing a tremendous amount from our members and our customers about the importance of liquidity and cash management, forecasting, and so on. So we launched a study with Ernie to understand, what does success look like for Treasury? What does it look like during this time? But beyond that, so what does it look like beyond the pandemic? And we were really seeking to understand what are the key drivers and success practices for Treasury and what we're calling the next normal, which is a term that Ernie coined, not the new normal, but the next normal. We were looking at how organizations are measuring Treasury success and how the success measures are and should be really evolving. And we wanted to look at the key skills needed to deliver Treasury success in this next normal, as well as hear any success stories from practitioners. So as you can see from the slide there, in terms of the survey bit of the research, we had 246 survey participants across industries and across regions. And then this slide here gives you a sense of the demographics of the survey respondents. It was a cross-industry study. It was a global study. You can see the top 5 industries that are represented on the upper left there of the slide. In terms of annual revenues of the participants, about 30% had over $1 billion in annual revenues. And then on the right piece of that slide there, you can see the mixture of treasury and finance titles that completed the survey.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel. And so it was it was an interesting time. We did a good job with getting so many responses because it's been like survey haven since the crisis started. So let's go ahead and dive in a little bit. And so one of the things that we want to look at, right, in terms of metrics is what are our responsibilities, right? These are the things we're doing to add value. And so we ask people, which of the following are included in the scope of Treasury at your organization? And so we see that the top few things: managing cash, managing debt, managing bank relationships. My first response is, and yours as well, I'm sure if you're a treasury manager, is only 60% of managing cash. Then what are you doing, right? Because if you ask most people, that's what that is. So that was a little surprising to me. So I actually did a pretty deep dive into the demographics and looked at it by job title and looked at it by revenue, and these results were fairly consistent. So I didn't see a big thing there. And so to me, this just speaks to right here is, the scope of Treasury. That's going to determine what the metrics are, but I'm not really sure that this is reflected quite accurately. And then what's interesting, that I'm giving you a little preview. So within the scope is managing financial risk and executing risk and hedging transactions. But when we start to see how companies measure Treasury success, I don't know if we're going to see that or not. So that's kind of gets to the part of the crux of the disconnect between success and metrics. And then managing relationships with your technology providers, I would hope that would be higher. That's probably changing. So really what stuck out to me was, one, the percentages were lower than I thought, but two, just that certain things really didn't make the survey or weren't quite as high as I thought here. So just to give us a little context there. And so, so let's say, okay, Ernie, you talked about this disconnect. So where is it? So let's take a look here. How do you currently measure Treasury success at your company? The top answers, as you can see, you could use more than one, right? But it's all across the board, right? Cash forecasting accuracy, 41%. Anyway, operating cash flow, that makes sense to me, right? Let's start looking at that cash conversion cycle, right? We're down there. The bank fees, bank fee trends, okay, that sounds good. Free cash flow, DSO, percentage of bank accounts. And so I think we're not, to me, there's just a disconnect here a little bit. And if you start to look at the umbrella of Treasury responsibilities, these are all kind of cash focused, which makes some sense. But then you look at only 60% of the folks, right, say they manage cash. And so as you start to look at these numbers, it's a little bit surprising. So to me, it's interesting. Again, the couple of things that stick out to me here are the percentage numbers, and then the fact that we don't see really risk in here, right? We don't see risk in here, and so we don't really, things that would have popped in my mind would have been counterparty risk, and we have some at the bottom, right? Like burn rate and employee engagement, but they're so far down the list. So you can see how we measure success. It goes across the board. And what we'll do now is we'll kind of dive in a little bit and just kind of say, okay, let's look at how we measure success, and let's see if we can put those into some categories and dive in there a little bit, and then say, okay, this is the way we're measuring cash management success. Is that something we should be measuring? Yes. So, okay, can we do it? Can we do it better? And then how do we inspire companies, all companies, right, to look at it in this framework? Because I think that definitely needs to be looked at. And so we'll dive in on one area of success, the top one, cash forecasting. And so there's many drivers of cash forecasting success. We have multiple sessions at the conference. If you want to learn a lot more about cash forecasting and especially technology and AI, I'm happy to report that there are changes in cash forecasting technology, which I haven't seen until the last 2 years. I probably did the same presentation and sat in the same one for probably 15 years. I'm a little old, but so there is some movement there. And so can't manage what you can't see, right? So if you're managing cash, if you're cash forecasting, you have to have visibility into your bank accounts. You also need that to make decisions in a timely manner. it's just as important, probably more important if you're a net borrower. And so only 15% of the respondents, right, have more than 90% visibility on a daily basis. So you look at the size of the companies that are there. And so, yeah, you might say, yeah, Ernie, well, that's because those are global bank accounts, right? They're all across the globe. But where are we today, right? We have all these TMS systems. We have all this technology, right? We're built to get that visibility. And so I'd love to see that number a lot higher, 70. So we've got probably 42% that are only at, so 58% are only at 50 to 74%. I would feel like I've got a huge blind spot there. And so we should measure, if we want to measure success in cash management, cash forecasting accuracy should be there. But not having that visibility is a huge inherent barrier to success. So as we start to define success and determine how we get there, we need to remove all the inherent barriers to our metrics. And so a lot of times we can move our metrics without much effort. So you can't manage what you can't see. So Rach, I want to let you go ahead and dive in here a little bit more on some of the things we saw in terms of cash forecasting.
Sure. Yeah, we drilled into cash forecasting and some of the practices that the survey respondents were engaging in with regards to cash forecasting. I would also say that the interviewees definitely indicated that cash forecasting was a top priority for them. You know, one of them was in the healthcare industry and they had to shut part of their hospitals down or what have you for COVID patients and moved to televisits and that kind of thing. So cash flow, cash forecasting, liquidity was a big priority. And they indicated that this is really going to continue in the near future, in the next normal. But as Ernie showed in the previous slide, cash forecasting accuracy and the operating cash flow were the top two ways that survey participants are currently measuring. As I mentioned, the interviewees said that this was big. I would say this is pretty consistent with what we're seeing in surveys of other corporate treasurers. For example, earlier this year, Treasury Strategies did a survey and it found that improving forecasting capabilities was the top priority for 2020, and that was up from their previous year's iteration of that survey. So we asked some questions. Number one, we asked about cash forecasting frequency there, and that's the slide on the left. Or the chart on the left. And what you can see is that more than half of survey respondents say that they're conducting cash forecasting on a monthly or more frequent basis. That I would say that was a little bit surprising because we thought that we would see maybe that, you know, the more frequency have a higher percentage. I would say in our conversations at APQC, we're definitely seeing organizations forecasting more frequently. Just to give you an example, the other day I participated or listened in rather to a roundtable of FP&A practitioners, and they definitely talked about the challenge of constantly reforecasting while things are changing daily for them in their environments. And they mentioned that the cadence of forecasting is accelerating in many organizations. And the fact that they used to forecast monthly, but now they're doing it every couple of days, and their systems aren't built out for that. So we're definitely seeing forecasting more frequently. We also asked about the time horizon of the cash flow forecast, and I don't think there was anything surprising here. We saw that in terms of the time horizon, the majority of the respondents report that they're forecasting more than 2 months out, and I think that that's fairly standard. I believe that most organizations, you know, forecast about 13 weeks out or the number of weeks in a fiscal quarter. Because ideally you want to extend far enough into the future so that you have time to react, but not so far out that, you know, the degree of certainty or what have you becomes completely wonky. The other question, and this is really interesting, that we asked was around accuracy. And that's the chart on the right. And so the survey respondents reported that their cash forecasting accuracy rates were not too great. Only about 43% of the survey respondents said that they've achieved typical cash flow forecasting accuracy of 75% or higher, and most are at least 50% accurate. So obviously inaccuracies here can lead to some issues like delayed payments, you know, in the worst case scenario, I guess, impaired relationships with suppliers. And this is a big opportunity for Treasury in the next normal to improve this process. I think one thing in talking to Ernie that he recommends is that companies think about measuring things like, if they're not doing it already, the opportunity cost of inaccurate cash flow forecasting as a potential success measure. So,
yeah, thank you. Let me jump in here. There's a couple of things really, a couple of things, points I want to make. And so the time horizon of cash flow forecast, I mean, it's surprising and it's not. I think companies shouldn't shy away. You should be consistent if at all possible, but you may have a different forecasting method for your daily needs if you're borrowing versus maybe your balance sheet, right? Or your strategic planning, you're going out 6-9 months. And so in some sense, the forecasting accuracy has to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, because what are you using it for? And so is it impacting decisions, right? Is it impacting decisions? So as Rachel mentioned, what's the opportunity cost? If I go from 50% to 75% accurate, what does it cost me to do that, right? And then what is the value, right, to me in doing that? So would I have borrowed more efficiently? Would I have managed my risk more efficiently? And so those are definitely drivers. One of the other things on cash forecasting is the method. And so I think with all the data that we have now, in the past, data was kind of at a premium, and it was almost only the biggest companies had the data that they needed to do more of that bottom-up forecast, which involves payment, AP and AR flows. And that's what really, we need to understand why things are moving, who's moving them and why. And so I am a strong proponent of doing that directly. So.
You want me to keep going here?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we also wanted to assess the extent to which the Treasury respondents felt that they had the needed data and systems to assess their cash management effectiveness, along with the extent that they're satisfied with the metrics and the KPIs used to measure cash management effectiveness. And the slides, or excuse me, the charts on this slide pretty much tell the same story, in that most of the survey respondents, roughly 3/4 there, feel relatively good in this capacity. In other words, that they have the needed data, they have the needed systems, they're fairly satisfied with their metrics and KPIs. So that was, I think, a little bit of an interesting disconnect as to why the cash forecasting accuracy wasn't a bit higher. Ernie, anything else you'd add to that one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Rachel and I have talked a little about the survey results and what we both found surprising, but to me it's almost like they don't know what they don't know, right? So it's almost like they think they have the data they need in the systems, but if they're not so if they're using the wrong metric or lens to look at cash management effectiveness, they got a false sense of security, because it's almost like, hey, we're doing an awesome job, right? But you don't know what you're trying to measure. So I'm doing a great job of being crappy, right? So, they have to go through that right lens. And so in one sense, it's good because it's optimistic. But if you look at FP&A surveys, if you ask, what I've been involved in global FP&A surveys, they also forecast, they say that they have the data that they need when they need it. It's 10%, right? So as this is another focus of a session, FP&A versus Treasury, we all need to get on the same team. And so again, we talk about, I think there's nothing wrong with that. The survey respondents are pretty happy with themselves. And in Treasury, I think we don't know what we don't know. So it's my job, right, to give my intuition. And then like organizations like APQC, they really put the facts behind the intuition. And so it's incredibly powerful that APQC reaches out to the practitioners and reaches out to the thought leaders, so we can start to transform our way of thinking. And so I think we've been stuck a little bit in our Treasury metrics on looking at certain things. And so to me, it was incredibly insightful. And it's really a thought leadership perspective for the APQC to really looking at how to do things differently. So I really appreciated that. Rachel, can you go ahead and walk us through this slide?
Yes, well, one of the things that we wanted to do from the survey responses was try and do a statistical analysis of the data. And so we analyzed the practices of survey respondents that are statistically correlated with the higher levels of cash forecasting accuracy. And maybe the results aren't too terribly surprising, but we saw that those respondents that had or reported higher cash flow forecasting accuracy were significantly more likely to engage in practices like have those higher levels of visibility into their bank accounts, as well as into their accounts payable and their supplier processes and activities, along with their accounts receivable and customer related activities. So we saw in a previous slide, only about 2 out of 5 survey respondents said that they have visibility into 75% or more of their bank accounts on a daily basis. So that's obviously very important, not only for the cash flow and the working capital management, but also as an enabler of better decision making, as well as for more rapid fraud detection and response. Some of the other practices statistically correlated with the higher reporters of cash flow forecasting accuracy were higher levels of collaboration between Treasury, payables, and receivables, as well as higher levels of control and input into the technology used by Treasury. So those are some interesting findings, I think, from the survey from a statistical perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it really kind of helps us define, right, what is the best in class, right? Who's the leader here? So, right, the leaders understand that there needs to be collaboration between Treasury, AP, and AR. So when I talk about how do you deliver success, you see technology, right? Visibility, visibility, visibility. That's technology, right? People, people, people. It makes sense, but yeah, sometimes people, it kind of wakes you up. Oh, let's get back to basics, right? People, process, technology, right? And again, it's a paradigm shift. We're trying to look at understanding what happened instead of why it happened. I mean, there's a correlation there, obviously, but we need to look at the why. And to look at the why, we have to shift our lens a little bit in cash forecasting specifically to a more direct approach. Now let's kind of go down and let's go back up. We all know I like to make people nauseous, right? Flying up and down the altitude. So let's go back up a little bit. And so we dove into that cash forecasting just because it was important, because that's the #1 thing. So that's what's out there. So we wanted to make sure that we touched on that. So I wanted to kind of group these by Treasury responsibility that we saw. And so these are some metrics that folks are using. And so I would encourage us, this is a place to look, right? I think managing cash conversion cycle, and free cash flow, people may say those are completely different, but they're all interrelated. That's what I think we need to be, right, measuring, and maybe a little different lens, but it's important. They're all kind of interrelated. So cash forecasting accuracy is kind of a driver, right, rather than a result. So cash forecasting accuracy really drives my cash conversion cycle. My DSO and DPO drive my cash conversion cycle, right? So it's almost like we need to look at the hierarchy, right? So what's the relationship? These actions done well here impact actions up here. So what is driving? So what are the most important things that impact the bottom line? And it's not that we don't want to measure everything, but maybe from a reporting standpoint. So maybe on the treasurer level, we want to look at cash conversion cycle. And then at that analyst level, we might want to look at DSO and DPO. But what does the CFO, right, care about, or the CEO care about? Well, what is it that's impacting the bottom line? Maybe it's our burn rate. We're doing an M&A strategy, right? What's our free cash flow? What do our investors care about? And so it gives us a good sense of what people are doing. But I just think it shows a little bit of a hodgepodge. And maybe it's just me that in addition to the metrics, it's almost as if we need to structure the metrics, right? Maybe there's the macro metrics, and then and look at the relationships, right, between the drivers of the metrics. And then as we pull the lever here, that's going to move all these metrics. And so if we impact the foundation in the right way, then that's just going to flow out. So instead of focusing on one, we have to look at the dynamics between all of them, and then it's going to drive, you know, the top line numbers that we're looking for. And then in managing bank relationships, which I often talk about. So I'm going to date myself here. So when I worked at AFP back in 2007 and 2009, we had a whole bank relationship management suite. That was a huge product. I was in charge of Treasury Search product. That was like one of the most important things. And if you look at what we've seen now, when's the last time you saw a session on bank scorecards or bank relationships? I mean, we see some sessions on RAROC, which is important. And I have a roundtable on bank relationship management, but I think we need to get back to that, right? And the way that companies are managing those metrics, bank fees, bank free trends, okay, that's important. Number of bank accounts, depends where you stand, depends on where you sit, right? So I don't know if that's a good number or not. It's maybe a short-term metric, right? I come in as a new treasurer, we get all these bank accounts, I have to rationalize those. Okay, great. So you're not going to want to spend your time every year saying, hey, I want to close some bank accounts. Now, if you're looking at investing in technology, that might be a side impact, right, of that. And that might help your visibility. We might need to reduce the number of bank accounts, but that's not something I would necessarily focus on an ongoing basis. And then I think cost of capital is something that should be higher. But I think we should start to get back to things like bank scorecards, right? And then looking at our alignment and expectations and an internal customer, right? Are we a good customer to our bank? And so agree, cash, owning cash, free cash flow, important. Managing bank relationships, important. We've got some of the tools there, but we're missing some of the tools. And the tools that we had, we need to gain alignment on which metrics we're all going to align on. Wouldn't it be nice if everyone knew, if you said, what does Treasury success mean? And then at the macro level, we had some consensus. And then maybe in retail, it was a little different. And then that's where the great metrics for APQC come in, right? Then we can start to say, within healthcare, companies that are this size or that size, and that's where you really get there. But we're kind of flying a little bit all over the place right now. So it's fascinating. We need to do some work, but this is why I can help, because you got to get back to basics, and that's really what I'm good at. Rachel, why don't you go ahead and drive us? Just give us your comments if you see anything on this slide. I just need to take a break. People are tired of listening to me.
Okay, well, so most of the survey respondents, as you can see there, we asked a series of questions around the bank relationships, and most of them said that they do conduct systematic and regular reviews of their banking relationships. You can see that 86%, and for the most part, it looks like they're doing them on at least a quarterly basis. So that's interesting. It is interesting in terms of, you know, the fact that, and we'll see here in a coming up slide, around how they feel their understanding of the bank fees as well as the RAROC. One point about the number of banks, I thought those were some interesting comments that you had. One of the individuals that we interviewed in the participant interviews worked for a large multinational technology organization, and he's retired now, but he spent his career in Treasury. And he had the opportunity to actually set up the international Treasury function for that large technology organization. And when he did it, they elected to centralize and use only one bank, which was such an interesting story because, you know, he said that gleaned them huge efficiencies.
Oh, yeah.
It gave them tremendous levels of customer service with this bank. You know, and there wasn't a whole lot of risk because it was a really large bank. And if this bank went under, then, you know, the world was ending kind of thing. So that was just a really, really interesting, I think, kind of perspective to hear from, you know, and take it as you will. Every company is different. And a lot of companies, you know, don't have this luxury necessarily, but definitely he advised to keep the number of bank relationships down, to rationalize that. It's a nightmare to eliminate bank relationships. If you can start kind of smaller and then go up as you need to, then that would be at least the advice of this organization. So I thought it was a good counter perspective.
I actually kind of, even though I talked the other point a little bit earlier, I actually went through the same exercise many years ago. And so I think it's at the top level, right? It's whether you're centralized or decentralized, right? And if you're centralized or want to go to centralized, absolutely, then a short-term thing, you want to minimize those bank accounts and you save a lot of money, right? And then, as Rachel mentioned, you have to be cognizant of the return your bank's getting, right? So you need to allocate those bank fees. And the bank that they were talking about, it's one of two banks. The names start with JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America, probably, because they're probably the only ones that can do that. But I had the opportunity to be talking to treasurers in 2008, and they went through this conversation. Their CEO said, we have to mitigate our risk to the aforementioned banks. And they're just like, I can't, I can't do business everywhere and in a more decentralized environment. And if you're doing payroll in certain countries, it's just not quite possible. So it's just interesting to look at those dynamics. One more thing. I think that I would aspire to have meetings more often and do them virtually. So now we've gotten more comfortable virtually. So I would say transition more to quarterly. Yeah, quarterly is good. I wouldn't go to annual or I wouldn't go to ad hoc. If you're requesting them, then something's going on, right? So I don't know if we want those only when requested meetings so often. So this is where I get to. Again, when I used to do this, I used to have to manage the bank scorecard. Back in 2007, a gentleman that worked for me, Terrence Foster, we redid the whole bank scorecard project, and it was a template. And I thought, wow, this is really powerful. And then we've kind of gotten away from that, as you can see. So how many people use a bank scorecard? 40%. The reason that this is surprising to me, it's only 40, is when you look at the demographics of the survey respondent, those are some really big companies, right? And so you think about the amount of spend they have just on bank fees, but the importance of the credit relationships and the quality of those relationships and making sure they're being a good customer of those relationships. Because even though they're big, if a crisis were to hit, then guess what? You're going to try and draw on a line of credit, and they might not let you do it because you haven't drawn it for a while. So you used to use them and no longer use them, 20%. So we have a short climb. Let's get those 40 up to 60. But then no, we have never done so. So I think part of the thing is that we need to reassess. We need to say, okay, I think it was a little too complicated before. The whole thing was like 6 or 7 pages, of assessing the relationship. I think if we can make that shorter, and then we should involve our banks on this, right? This is what we're measuring on you. What do you think about this? And then we should ask the banks to rate us, right? How are we as a customer? Do you have the information that you need? So I'm doing a town hall style roundtable on bank relationships, and I'm going to present both sides of the relationship. So the perspective is you should have is, how can I be a better customer? What can I do for you? What do you need from me? And so there's 2 sides to that relationship, but I think we should be measuring them, and they should understand, but we should encourage them to measure us as a customer. Here's an example. My boss back in the day was the treasurer, and we were a smaller middle market company, but because we weren't a huge company and our stock was thinly traded, we often got downgraded to a B credit, right, or a B minus credit, but we were an A credit. And he had to work really hard to get them to price us as an A credit, right? So he had to educate them on our business and, all those sorts of things. And once they got it, they were like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you have to take ownership to make sure that your banks understand your company and your business, and it's beneficial to all. So Rachel, why don't you go ahead and drive us through this slide a little bit deeper into the statistics of survey here.
Yes, we wanted to also ask about the extent that Treasury understands their bank fees, how often they're benchmarking their bank fees, and the extent that Treasury understands that RAROC. And what we saw, I'm actually going to start with the chart there in the middle, was that most of them are benchmarking the bank fees at least annually was the question. So at least annually, 81% say that they're benchmarking bank fees at least annually. And most, I think for both of those slides on the left and on the right, roughly around 3/4, feel that Treasury understands their bank fees, as well as they relatively understand the risk-adjusted return on capital used by the bank to assess the ROI of their company's business to the bank. So that's good news. On the benchmarking bit, I would just say that data is pretty consistent with, I think, other research studies. Again, referencing one by Treasury Strategies a little while back, their corporate bank fee management survey found that 70% of corporate treasurers say they review their bank service fees on a monthly basis. But they found that only 21%, I guess, are using service price benchmarks in their bank fee management program. So that's a disconnect. So these are some of the things that we saw in this survey. Anything else, Ernie, that you'd add to these?
Yeah, those people that know me know I'm not going to be able to not comment on this because I used to manage the AFP service codes. And so I really wish that this percentage of people actually understood their bank management, their service fees on a global basis. I'm pretty, this doesn't like roll up to, now the participant sizes, right? The bigger companies, the enterprise companies, I should have looked deeper here into the smaller companies, but if I were to get a treasury manager and get out their bank statements and ask them to explain everything to me in the benchmark it, I'd be surprised if 81% of the people, or whatever that number could be. Not that it's not possible. I hope I'm wrong. And then the bank understands the RAROC. I think that may be a perception more than a reality. So I should have, maybe we'll dig a little bit deeper if we do this again and ask them, does your bank, you and your bank specifically talk about RAROC, right? So you can, that's a perception in reality. But benchmarking bank fees, I'm glad this number is so high. I wish more could do it, but there's still a lot of, part of it is the transparency from the banks. And so if you think about it, banks, if they overcharge you, that comes right off the bottom line, right? If you lower your fees, that's 100% margin for them, right? If they're overcharging you, right? And so for the banks to be really, really honest, that's billions of dollars off the bottom line that they really can't afford to lose. So I did my best to help. AFP has done some standardization on the global service codes, but then they find a way to mask them, they bundle them together. And so it's about that relationship. So my advice is you can get away with this when you first go into an organization. I pulled out my bank analysis fee, told the person to explain it. This is a long time ago. Guess how many people they had to bring in to explain every line to me? 6. So, hopefully that's changed. So that's something we need to keep our eye on. Again, it's something that it's important, but where you stand depends on where you sit, right? How much are you spending in bank fees, right? What's the level of inefficiency? Sometimes we may have to endure higher fees if we want more quality, if we want more customer service, if we have to feed our RAROC with our bank. And so for me, I always had the perspective, minimize bank fees. And on the surface, that makes sense, but sometimes we have to look at that relationship and then how that relationship rolls up in the credit. So banks aren't allowed to tie credit to fees, but that's just not kind of the reality. So there is a balance there as well. So let's take a look at, some of these are things that really stick out to me as a practitioner. I'll put my Treasury practitioner hat. And so we look at the metrics, right? What are the metrics that we're using and how are we measuring success? We have only marginal attention to employee engagement. We all know that's incredibly important. That drives everything across the organization. Minor attention to AP processing costs, minor attention. There's metrics, maybe less than 20% are using it, AR processing costs. And so these AR done wrong and AP done wrong, those are huge numbers. And we have sessions on that at the conference as well. But those are things that you might say, well, it's not under my purview. My view is that AP and AR should report up through Treasury. That's part of the cash conversion cycle. It's a big part of that efficiency metrics. And then some of the metrics that are missing from how we define success, we didn't really see anything on debt and investments. And maybe we had cost of capital. Maybe we didn't really see counterparty risk, financial risk, operational risk, customer engagement, time allocation, internal customer assessment, payment type allocation. And you're like, man, Arne, we can't measure everything. I'm like, well, maybe not everything, but these, if you're defining success the right way, these are all areas. How effective are we at risk management? How effective are we with banks? How effective are we with impacting the customer experience? How productive is my department? That's time allocation. Here's a metric that is missing. And I really only got my attention after I started doing a lot of technology focused thought leadership in AP and AR, payment type allocation, right? How many checks are we writing? How many ACHs are we sending? How many ghost card, payments are we, doing? So we have to look at that control, right? How and when we make payments. And it's not that we want to force all our customers to take credit cards, because that's not going to happen, but there's a lot of missing opportunity there. So we should have a target for our payment allocation. And then if we miss that, let's look, how much does it cost me to write a check, right? How much does it cost me to process the ACH? How much does it cost me? And then if I move that allocation up 5–10%, you can see the cost there, right? There's hard dollar cost, but then there's productivity cost as well. And so just part of that disconnect. And so, there's really no metrics in success, but we ask them, what type of metrics does Treasury use to leverage to manage? You manage our debt and investments, we're managing it. It's not part of your success, it's your responsibility. So you need to tie your responsibilities with how you define success. So some of the ratios that we have, which makes sense, not a big surprise. But again, the percentages are a little bit smaller than I was expecting. Debt to equity, total debt to equity, ROA, cash interest turnover, current ratio. And so not anything real surprising here. And these are metrics that you can use. My point here is that they're kind of missing in terms of how we define success, but we are paying attention. And we say we're managing them, but we're not really considering how well we manage those to our success. So we need to make sure that those things are tied together. So here's another big point of mine, which I make, is collaboration, right? So we need to look at the relationships, right? What kind of relationships do we have? We're not really looking at our internal relationships. And so you look at how well do we partner with other parts of the organization, right? Relative, how do we define success? Forecasting, right? That's our top one. Reporting and protection against risk. And so what we would see is that folks that are more invested in those relationships and have the visibility in the systems, they're going to facilitate that collaboration and have less of that siloed approach and look to that. And so some of these are pretty heartening to me, because we have a lot of collaboration here, right, with the CFO and the board. So that's great news, right? We're getting a seat at the table, right? So we're not being boxed out. When I was back in Treasury, the treasurer and the CFO, sometimes the treasurer got boxed out. So this is good, especially since COVID hit. Oh yeah, we're getting pulled into the room now. You know, what's AR going to be? What's AP going to be? What are we doing? Oh man, how are we paying people? We have to fix our processes. I love to see this management accounting side, because when I was in Treasury, there was a little bit of a disconnect. So that's good. M&A is an area. I call this an emerging area of Treasury responsibility. So that's good to see. But I mean, it's good to see a great extent, the moderate extent, you know, at least we're at the table. So we want to see these to a great, so we have to identify opportunities. So I call this, I'm trying to think of the word that I use. We need to find that engagement level. Oh, building your brand, right, at work. So I do a session on building your brand at work. So as we build our brand at work, we are able to collaborate. We have the relationships. We're a trusted partner. And then the more interactions that we get. So let's say we need investment in forecasting technology or risk management technology. The board, they don't engage with us on these things, so they're not going to be vested in it. It's not going to be on their radar screen. So the better relationships we have, the better. And so just taking a look again at some more data, how does your, and again, we talk about KPIs, even though we're not tying that to risk, these are things that we need to look at. So we actually have the framework there, and we're using some of the metrics, and some of the metrics are valuable, but we need to look at, okay, how do we get these metrics and maybe aggregate them into a success metrics for Treasury. So, you know, we're right on par here. Of course, there's some ambiguity here on how you actually quantify these, but identified risk, frequency of risk, costs incurred due to risk. This one I would expect to be higher. And then unidentified and unanticipated risk. And so one of the points I want to make here is we need to keep looking at what we're measuring and why, and then do we need to evolve? And I think in Treasury, a lot of folks weren't measuring things, or they've never looked at if they're still measuring the right things. And I think a lot of risks have changed with COVID, especially payments risk, right? And maybe AR risk and counterparty risk. So I think one of the things that kind of sticks out to me in a post-COVID world, not only do we be measuring the right things and pulling the right levers, we need to make sure that we are assessing whether or not these are the right things to measure. Are we aligned on what success looks like? And you might not be able to hit your Treasury metrics success. So I ask a question often in webinars is, have your Treasury metrics, you know, suffered from COVID? And so you have to realign on our expectations. So the bar may be, you know, this number, but you may have to lower the bar beyond your control. So we need to realign on those expectations. And then in terms of Treasury success, those drivers of success. So this is kind of some of the top 7, right? So this is what really drives Treasury performance. At the top level, we have to have a performance management network. And so that's kind of the top part. How do we define success? And then what are the key factors and how do we pull the right levers? So again, let's start at the top. As we mentioned earlier, people. Do you have the right people with the right skills? Do you collaborate, or do you facilitate collaboration with technology? A lot of the solutions out there facilitate collaboration. One version of the truth facilitates collaboration. technology that allows your customers and you to see the same thing? That facilitates collaboration. Do you have visibility? This is probably my top soapbox item. Can't manage what you can't see. Do you have the data? And so I guess for me, it comes down to what is success, right? How are we going to get there? People, process, technology. But in terms of delivering, right, I have to be able to see what I need to see when I need to see it. I need to be right on what I need to see, right? I need the right data. I need the right technology to let me do analysis and communicate the story behind the numbers. But also, I need to have the relationships in place to have control and influence where you need it and when you need it. So my treasury success is cash conversion cycle. I need to have control of AP and AR. So I think those are 7 things that are really important to take away. And one of the things that also kind of can impact your treasury success is your environment. Just more, and I think it's tremendously sticks out here to me, except for there's only 43% of treasury that reports to the CFO. I thought there would have been a little bit more direct report. So there's kind of a layer in there with these 36% of folks in terms of that structure. So I think having that extra layer in there could be detrimental to treasury success. That's just my personal opinion. And then in terms of the people involved and the skills, Rachel, why don't you go ahead and drive us through the slide?
Yes, we actually didn't ask this question in the survey. We asked it in the interviews because we really wanted to understand what skills will be the highest priority for Treasury in the next normal. And so we've summarized in really small font here what the interviewees had to say in terms of key themes were the top skills. I'm not going to go through all of these, but a couple of points. Number one would be that the technical skills for Treasury and finance and accounting, that functional body of knowledge, that's a given. So that's sort of a satisfier in the overall hierarchy of needs. It's assumed that everybody has, that most people have that. Beyond that, though, the people said that they were really interested in mostly soft skills, which I thought was just very, very interesting, along with just kind of like a base level of proficiency in data and systems. Certainly nobody is expected to be a programmer. You got to know how the systems work. And people mention Excel. You need to be proficient in Excel. That seems to be a tool that's so user-friendly. Everybody has it. You don't have to ask IT. So you need to have some skills there. But yeah, in terms of the soft skills, they emphasize the importance of communication, especially in a time such as this, right? Things are so unclear. There's so much uncertainty, and so communication is critical right now to be clear communicators. They emphasize the importance of business partnering and teaming and collaboration. Collaboration was a big theme in this project. Collaboration not only internally, but externally with your customers and your stakeholders and your banks. And business partnership has been a theme across finance. Everybody in finance is really striving to be a better business partner. And then they emphasize the importance of growth orientation, both for their self and for the business. The idea of being a continuous learner, taking that longer term perspective, and agility. I'm sick of the word pivot and I'm sick of the phrase lean in, so I'm only going to say it that one time, but agility is a core capability of organizations, and they emphasize that is really something that people need to be comfortable with in Treasury, because things are always changing in Treasury, and new regulations and rules and compliance and so on. Some of the other important skills I listed down there at the bottom from the interviews, they're all very important. The passion, the authenticity, the tenacity, good project managers. I love the one about having strength of character and the courage to say no. So not thinking short term, but actually having the courage to do what's right for the business. So those are the things that came through there.
Thank you so much. This is a slide, and you all have access to the slides. This is one that I would print out. When I talk about what skills do you need, right, to deliver success, this is a great framework to put that into. And personally, I think I fall under the other important skills, right? Authentic, passionate, tenacious. I might use this on my resume. Good project manager, right? And strong character to say no. And so this is incredibly insightful. And so just to dovetail on what Rachel said perfectly, I talk to people all the time. I've done sessions at the conference, CFOs, what are you looking for? What are you looking for? And if you'd asked that question, and even 5 years ago, it would have been technical skills, technical skills. Now it's like, I want someone that can collaborate, someone that's agile, someone that, can drive consensus. And so I'm glad to see that. But I think it's incredibly important that we look at our team and our team dynamics and really, some people need to be taught to communicate with impact. But what I continuously heard is, I want someone who views learning as a way of life and not a chore. I can't teach that, but I can teach them everything else. And I think that's a flip, and I'm glad to see that. So again, we look at collaboration, just kind of the lay of the land. What are we doing here? Again, it's important for AP and AR. We talked about that. Ideal, good. I'm glad to see 64%, but we can do better to better understand, right? Do we work with other areas relative to how to understand inflows and outflows? I would say, I'm glad 80% of us are doing it, but I'm not seeing that in my cash forecasting accuracy. So maybe there's got to be something else going on. Maybe it's the data, maybe it's the system. But if we're really understanding those cash flows, then we should be better at that collaboration. And then we talked about visibility, right? We can look at AP and AR. We need that visibility there. We need to do better on that sense as well. And so, Rachel, do you have anything to want to touch on in the slide here?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, we saw this slide earlier, we already talked about it. I think it just kind of reiterates the point about your framework in terms of evaluating where you stand in terms of Treasury. You need to know where you stand on your systems, any gaps, similar with people. So it's the people, process, and technology. So I would just encourage the audience watching to answer these questions for themselves as part of their gap analysis.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then we
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, in terms of technology, we also asked about which approaches, many of these are technology related, that organizations are leveraging for cash management. And I think, Shirley, you're going to probably comment on some of these. Some of these were maybe a little bit surprising. Real-time payments, everybody's talking about that. So we saw that 58% or so are doing. Some of these other things were a little bit lower maybe than I would have expected, like the mobile banking app. I would have expected to see that higher. And that came out in the interviews as well. Just the thought that on a personal standpoint, we have, it seems like a whole lot more functionality and sophistication as consumers maybe than we do as corporates and working with the bank. So kind of seeing a little bit of a lag perhaps. And I'm sure this is changing rapidly, but a little bit of lag perhaps in the user friendliness of the tools that are available with the banks and the banking apps. Just a few things on technology that I would add. Everybody in the interviews pretty much said that they're relying on technology to keep their staff where it is. They're not anticipating any increase in staff anytime soon. So technology is huge. And they're also diving into the fintech. Now, we didn't ask about fintech in this survey because we ask about it in our open standards research, but we've seen, for example, RPA, we've seen that more than half of survey respondents in our open standards research say they've engaged in RPA work in Treasury to at least some extent, but only 18% say that the use is optimized. Similar with cognitive computing, we see that 4 out of 5, that's pretty high, say that they're implementing it to some extent. So they could be way down in the piloting and so on, but only a quarter say they fully implemented it. So there's still a ways to go, but they're definitely diving in. We had an interviewee talk about how she is leveraging AI and machine learning for cash forecasting. It got their time down from creating the cash forecast from 4 days to half a day. Wow. So anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. As you know me pretty well, Rachel, some of these things were really surprising to me. Some of the fact that real-time payments was really the highest part. So you talk about the lag in mobile banking apps. We were talking about this 20-something years ago. I'm dating myself, so that we still have that fear on the risk management side. We already talked about this. We need the visibility of the bank accounts. It's just not there. We need to do better. And then we need to have control, right? We can have the policies in place, right? We need to have control, right? Do you have a policy in place? That's good. We have 89%, but it's got to be the right policy. It's got to be reviewed. It's got to be communicated, right? And adhered to. So I talk about T&E all the time. So these are just kind of dimensions of our environment that facilitate our success. And then this slide is going to make me dizzy. There's a lot on here. So, so I could spend 20 minutes on this slide, and Rachel's like, please don't. But, you know, we really have to have influence, right? We want to say, what impacts my success, and then start to say, this is what I have control over. This is what I indirect control. This is what I have influence. And we start to say, uh-oh, my success is determined on this. I have minimal to no influence. How do I change that, right? Or what level of influence do I need to have? What type of relationships do I need to build? And so it's just kind of part of that look in the mirror, right? Control and influence is something that we need to have. It might not be a specific metric about it individually, but then we need to be cognizant, maybe you're the treasurer, that these are things that I need to facilitate for my team if I want to expect them to deliver results. This one was, I was pleasantly surprised. Provide your strategic value to the C-suite, provide transactional work as well as frequently consulted. We'd like to see that number higher. And then internally, it's the 28's kind of a good number, but we want to see that to 0. So strategic guidance, I would imagine if we would have taken the survey a little bit earlier, if we would have done one in February and then done one now, I bet we would have seen more people say the CFO wants to see me all the time. But that's just something, again, as a leader, right? My department wants to be successful. Okay, let's make sure that we have a seat at the table, and what do we need to do in terms of people, process, and technology to get there. And so finally, on some key takeaways, first I'll have Rachel go ahead and just kind of give us an overview of some inferences that we might be able to make in terms of kind of the high performers in delivering success.
Yeah, just real quick. So again, we wanted to do a statistical analysis around those practices that were correlated with the survey respondents who rated themselves higher on that previous slide as providers of the strategic value, just so to see, all right, well, which practices do they say that they're engaging in, you know, significantly higher? And so we found that risk was a big one. They're including managing financial and operational risk in the scope of Treasury. They're also more likely to partner with the CFO and the board to engage in forecasting, reporting, and protection against risk. So I would say that in the research, we definitely saw that Treasury was evolving toward taking a bigger role in providing some of these more strategic services, in addition to the more traditional services that are expected, like risk management, like having an active role in being a leader in the emerging tools and technologies and technology selections, that kind of thing. We also saw that Treasury was, that the high performers in terms of the strategic decision support were more likely to have higher levels of influence or control over data integrity and management. Obviously, data integrity is a precursor to any kind of analytics for forecasting. Treasury and finance has a big role in terms of making sure that that master data is kept clean and accurate. In terms of data integrity, they also have a big role to play in terms of reducing fraud. So that is a strategic role for Treasury. And then finally, those high performers were more likely to, again, have that responsibility to conduct systematic and regular reviews of their banking relationships. So partnering internally and externally in collaboration has really been a key theme of the study, and taking ownership of that entire CCC, the cash conversion cycle.
Thank you so much. The one that sticks out to me here is the first one, right? It's great that we're included in managing financial risk and operational risk, but we don't have that as a how we define Treasury success. And so that's what gets us to the table, and that's where the C-suite sees us offering value, because that's what they're inviting us to collaborate on. So we really need to focus on getting that into our success metrics and making sure that we manage those. And so just some key takeaways just from what we've seen, and then in terms of things that my theory, aligning the theory to the practice, hypothesis was there's not a lot of consensus, and that was confirmed, at least from the survey. There's no consensus around how to measure Treasury success. Treasury metrics are often used are disconnected metrics are disconnected from success. We need to do a better job on that, get that alignment. We need to invest in defining what Treasury success means, because that's at the top of the pyramid. We don't have consensus there. It's hard for us to estimate and communicate that value. If we want more resources, we want a bigger strategic seat at the table, then we need to communicate and define success with the C-suite, right? And others across the enterprise. And really, when we look at things, in terms of success, where we are, right, where do we want to go? Oftentimes, it looks like we're going to climb Mount Everest, but then once we start to identify some inherent barriers, perceptions, technology, people, process, as we start to move those down, that mountain becomes a much less strenuous hike. And we need to identify the right metrics, and we need to identify and understand, that's a new word, OW, the impact, key drivers of Treasury success. So I hope you have enjoyed our session today. It was incredibly fun for me to do the survey and really look at the results. So Rachel, thank you so much, not only for speaking with me, but giving me the opportunity to collaborate with you and APQC on the survey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.